everyone, and welcome. Welcome to our third debate. Thank you for joining us. I'm sure you will not be disappointed. We've got four fantastic speakers lined up for this evening's topic, which is farm profitability becoming increasingly dependent on diversification? A very topical question, I'm sure you will all agree. So first of all, I would like to introduce our chairman, Mr. David Fursdon, Lord Lieutenant of Devon, but also our very own YFC president. So we are incredibly privileged to have him this evening to chair this debate. I'm sure he'll be bringing in some valued points as well. So without any further ado, I would like to just give a little bit of context around the debate. So first of all, we have four speakers that will be giving a little introduction, giving their opening remarks on the topic. This would be followed by a debate section. And then finally, there will be time for questions and answers. So hopefully you'll all see a chat button on your screen. So if you've got any questions, please just pop them in the chat and either David or I will be able to pick them up and bring them to the panel. And now, without any further ado, I would like to pass over to our chairman for tonight's debate. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Helen. And as Helen has said, this is the third of our debates. We normally have one at the Devon County Show. So the fact that we're on to the third one is stretching the talents of the chairman, I'm afraid, because I normally only have to get worked up to do one a year. But it's great, actually. They've been good fun, and we've had some interesting panelists telling them a bit about themselves, telling us about themselves and their business, and also speaking to the subject. So I hope you will feel that there might be some stuff that you want to ask a question about in the chat, and depending on timing, we'll come to those later. So the subject is farm profitability becoming increasingly dependent on diversification, and this is one hell of a year to ask that question, actually, and I think it'll be very interesting to see how people address this, because our panel are a very wide range of experienced people working in the agricultural industry widely. And we have Chris Down from Crealy. They have 1,000 acres which they farm, but they also have Crealy Adventure Park. And so there is a prime example of diversification just outside Exeter. You've probably been there and seen it. So a really good venture. We've also got Angela Trotter, who is been in banking for a while. She is the agricultural manager with HSBC in Exeter, and she will see a wide range of businesses from the figures point of view as much as anything else, and will be really well placed to judge the businesses that she sees being successful and those that aren't. And she will have, I'm sure, and the bank will have real views about diversification. We've got Mark Glanvill too, no stranger to the YFC, and he again is a farmer who's practicing diversification. In his case, he's got at one end of the scale with an innovative robotic dairy, and at the other end of the scale, he's running a self-storage operation in East Devon. So great to have you, Mark. And last and by no means least is George Greaves from Strutt and Parker in Exeter. And he again, with all that Strutt and Parker do, will have a broad range of experience of diversification projects and enterprises, and will have views, I'm sure. So what we're going to do is I've asked the panelists if they would each speak for 3 or 4 minutes as an introduction, and I've left it really up to them, but speaking maybe about their experience and how that brings them to some views on the subject that we've got today. And once they have finished, I'm going to ask them some questions, and we'll have a bit of a debate amongst ourselves, and hopefully their talk and the debate will prompt questions from you that you can put in the chat, and we'll pick up later on. So we're going to start with Chris. Chris, if you'd like to go off first and speak about your experiences and the subject. Thank you. And come off mute to start with. Can you?
That would help a lot. Thank you, David. Good evening, everyone. My name is Chris Down, and I am an arable and pig farmer, farming in East Devon with my wife and father. We also run and own the family business known as Crealy Theme Park and Resort, which has been an interesting time over the last 6 months, being closed for a large part of that. The question of today's debate is farm profitability becoming increasingly dependent on diversification? Now, my grandfather was lucky enough to have taken on the tenancy at Hayes Barton, part of the Clinton Devon estates, nearly 80 years ago. Since then, my father and now I farm here also. Hayes Barton is the birthplace of Sir Walter Raleigh, and as such, my grandmother used to show visitors around the house for a shilling. So even then, back then, there was diversification in agriculture and indeed in our family. My mother did bed and breakfast at the farm for many years, as well as holiday lets in some surplus properties that we owned, which added significantly to the farm's income and viability and alternative income streams. In the late 80s, right at the beginning when farmers were being encouraged to diversify, my family and I started letting the public come in to see our cows being milked and to play. This has developed over the years into Crealy Theme Park and Resort, employing up to 300 people in the summer. Along with wind turbines, PV, AD and biomass, we have continued to diversify where at all possible and when there are opportunities to do so. These additional income streams allow us to be more resilient over the long term, and I would recommend a diversified income for all farms. One might argue now that with the reducing of with the cap reforms and the changes now facing Brexit with reduced subsidies, we have actually always had diversified income by these subsidies. But when you look around at farms, there are very few now that do not have any diversified income, whether it's letting out a house or many different avenues of income. So that's all I have to say at this time, and look forward to the debate.
Thank you very much, Chris, and interesting history bit as well. I've also been a tour guide at home, so I know all about it. So we're going to come on now to Angela Trotter. So Angela, over to you.
Thank you very much, David, and good evening, everyone, and it's a pleasure to be with you. My name's Angela Trotter. I'm an agriculture manager with HSBC. A bit about myself: I'm married, I live up on Dartmoor. I originally joined the bank in 1979 when it was Midland. I've been there ever since, and I've worked in the agricultural department since 1995. I love where I work. I love the type of banking that I do, and I can honestly say I wouldn't want to work anywhere else. So, farm diversification. Well, I think you can honestly say, you could also say that it's always been very important, but it's been highlighted perhaps more recently with elms coming in, removal of BPS, all of which are considerations. But having said all of that, I don't think probably every farmer needs to diversify. It's not for every farm. But if you are looking to diversify, it's very important that you look at your market, who you're going to go to, what is the route to market. And in farming, there's generally always a market for what you produce. that may not always be the case outside of farming. I know you may not always get the price you want for your goods, but there's generally always a market there. So it's very important to do research, take advice from professionals, and consider the bigger picture sometimes of whether there are tax disadvantages, agricultural property relief disadvantages. All of these things are best clarified before you embark on any diversification. But not all diversification generally has to be away from farming. It could be moving from one type of farming to another. It could be producing eggs or broilers instead of your beef and sheep farming or your existing dairy. It could be more of a diversification with farming, looking at perhaps producing goat meat or goat milk, cheese, venison manufacturing, cider production, vegetables, salads, and just some of the diversification opportunities that we've seen and we've spoken to clients about over recent years. Is it diversification, or is it just making more use of your own farm resources, your buildings, your sheds, the land you have, the machinery, your equipment? Think of me. It would be really difficult for me to diversify. I live in a house. I live in a lovely place in Devon, but I live in a house. I have a garden. I've never run a business. I do not have a business account. I don't have an accountant. So there are lots of advantages to farmers with existing businesses. I once worked with a colleague who did take up farming, I think probably to supplement his income a little, but I'm really not suggesting that anybody diversifies into banking. If you do diversify, I think it's very important not to take your eye off your core business. That's where the majority of your expertise lies, the majority of your time and management, and hopefully the majority of your profitability. Maybe you can look at your core business for repayment or spare cash to support any form of diversification. But diversification projects are quite wide, and projects that I've looked at over the years, we've looked at nurseries for preschool children, commercial units, storage units, renewable projects, which were mentioned earlier, battery storage, nurseries for growing plants, farm shops, and farmers who produce produce for farmers' markets. And diversification can also be very useful for succession planning. It can help to set up a new enterprise for a younger generation. In the past, if you're running your flock of sheep, oh, we never did it like that in my day, or I'd rather you didn't go down that route. But a new venture could bring with it specific responsibilities, an area of expertise, and something that's really your own. And just to finish my part, because I'm sure I've probably run out of time, from a lending perspective, just never underestimate how much we will assess you as an individual. The first person we look at when we have a lending proposition is you, the person, your background, your qualifications, your expertise, and particularly your passion. Following that, we'll then perform our normal assessments of affordability of the project, and that's where it's helpful for you to take time together to have actually looked at budgets and cash flows and how viable it is. Don't just do that for us, do it for yourself as well. That's very, very important. But then we look at, your ability to service that and any security that's available. But I cannot stress more how important it is that we look at the person behind the business. Thank you, David. I probably said far too much.
Well, no, I wasn't looking at the clock, of course, Angela. No, it was good. Thank you very much. So now we go to Mark. Mark, if you'd like to give us your introduction, please.
Good evening. So yeah, thank you, David. So first of all, just a bit about me. and sort of my family background. So we are running a mixed family business. We have a robotic dairy, and on the side of that we rear all our own replacements, and we finish all the beef we produce. So we carry somewhere between 800 and 850 head of cattle at any one time. And we also have a self-storage diversification. As a family business, we've been diversified since before I can remember, because my mum ran a very successful B&B until only a couple of years ago, which I think a lot of farmers' wives have done in the past, because it meant a way of being at home with the children and being able to spend time with them, and also extra income to, do whatever else with. I went to university in 2006, went to the University of Reading, and had a fantastic time, which is obviously the most important part. But when I was there, I realised that a lot of the farmers or people there studying who had farms at home, most of them were diversified in some way. And through speaking to them, sort of thousands of ideas of what you could do. And when I came home to the farm in 2009, I knew what I wanted to do. In 2010, we managed to start doing self-storage, and it's now grown to quite a significant part of what we do 10 years later, and it's going very well. So with tonight's sort of question, is farm profitability becoming increasingly dependent on diversification? My answer is yes. But what I want to make really clear is I'm not saying that farming can't be profitable. We all know very good farmers locally who are making a lot of money, and I can proudly say that both parts of our enterprise are profitable. However, farming incomes often will run sort of like a 5-year cycle, where 1 year you might make a significantly large profit, then have 3 mediocre years, and 1 year where everything goes completely wrong. Now, often you could still be a good farmer, and yet global influences such as weather, is normally the weather, which has then a knock-on effect on feed prices. I mean, Chris would know this year he's benefited from the swine flu in China, so that means the pig price is high. There's global things which have an impact on what you do. So even if you do it to the best of your ability, you may still have a bad year. The benefit of a diversified income, if it's something like lettings or residential or anything like that, is it gives a regular income stream and it brings stability to a business. The other thing with a diversification is it's normally a higher profit margin. Now, if you say do run of the mill and you go to market and buy your calf and then you want to fatten that and sell it, the margins are tight. There's no two ways about it. Whereas with a lot of diversification projects, often they are slightly higher margins. Often also the amount of capital employed to get a diversification going is significantly less than starting or in a huge increase in a modern farming business. Often to really move your farm forward, it's huge numbers. Whereas for a young person or anybody keen to have a go for sort of £20,000 or £30,000, you could actually get the ball rolling. I agree it will grow from there, but you can get it moving. The other thing is mentally stimulation. Often farmers have been doing the same thing their whole lives, and if suddenly you've got a new project or whatever, it breaks the sort of the norm, and you can get excited by this new challenge and new project. So yeah, I think that yeah, diversification is going to be more common in the future.
Thanks, Mark. That's a great whiz through those various different options. Thank you for that. So George, if you'd like to go now, good to hear from you.
Thanks very much, David, and hello everybody. Lovely to be joining you all, albeit from my kitchen table, which is a bit bizarre. I work for a national real estate agency called Strutt & Parker. We're based in Southernhay, and the team that I'm part of, really we carry all sorts of general property advice for rural property owners, but the part that I'm really involved in is estate management. So the perspective with which I normally look at diversification is normally from the landlord's perspective, but obviously given the landlord-tenant relationship, also have to switch hats every now and again when speaking to tenants on various estates that we look after. delve deeper into their business. So it gives us quite a well-rounded view of how different people, different stakeholders in the rural economy will approach diversification. And I'm afraid I'm going to throw some statistics in to flesh this out a little bit, in that I think we're all agreed here that farmers need to diversify. And as Chris said, farmers always have diversified, or lots of farmers have always diversified. I think the reason that we're here discussing this is there's an increasing need for farmers to diversify and generate different income streams. Now, I'm not going to claim to be the author of these statistics, nor am I going to claim to know everything about them. So David, if you please hold fire on some of the nastier questions about where my stats come from, that would be much appreciated. But our company has carried out a farming research project over the last 5 years. Now, looks into all sorts of different farm types, poorly performing farms, well-performing farms, arable farms, pig farms, poultry, you name it, the whole spectrum. And the results, I'm sorry to say, are fairly grim reading when we're looking at profitability. So the average farm profit from the last 5 years was apparently £42,000 per annum across all sectors. And of that £42,000, farming only made up 6%, agri-environment schemes made up 12%, diversification made up 25%, while basic payment scheme subsidy payments made up a massive 58%. Now, I do accept that these are incredibly broad brush statistics, and if you delve deeper into individual farms, then it paints a different picture. But clearly there's a problem there. And Chris alluded to it earlier on, that the basic payment scheme is being phased out over the next few years, and farmers are going to have to look for different ways to support their existing business, develop the existing business, but also perhaps branch out and diversify so that those lower proportions of the profit can be developed further to fill in the gulf that's going to be created by the removal of the direct subsidy payment. It's a huge challenge, but I think there's a huge amount of opportunity as well. And something that in our industry we're getting particularly excited about at the moment is the focus, or the renewed focus, on the idea of natural capital, biodiversity, net gain, the government's targets to reach carbon neutral by 2050. And all of these things, all of a sudden, the countryside and the rural economy is going to offer a huge amount of opportunity to, whether it's urban markets, whether it's the rural economy. We're on the cusp of lots and lots happening. So whereas before we might have had a real problem for, let's say, a very traditional livestock farm on the edge of Dartmoor, let's say, poor transport links, limited diversification options they can realistically go into, with perhaps some marginal, less productive land, what we're starting to see is actually those pieces of less productive land are starting to generate a lot of interest from those people looking to offset their carbon footprint. So there's a huge amount of scope, I think, for farms to diversify. And actually, I think the good news is that while everybody knows about glamping and ice cream making and farm tours and so on, I think there's going to be a really exciting new avenue of farm diversification as the government policies really adapt to the rising sort of need for everybody to be more environmentally sensitive. So I think the message from our end is it's a huge challenge, but actually a huge opportunity. And we're really enjoying getting involved with landowners at the moment that are taking this on in their stride and wanting to try exciting things.
George, thank you very much indeed. For really interesting perspectives, can I start by picking up your last bit, George, really, about the environment? I've heard quite a lot about natural capital over the last 5 or 10 years. Quite a lot of it's been hot air. Because it hasn't led to a specific income stream. It sounds good, but the one that you have mentioned is probably one of the more interesting ones. Do you think there is going to be sufficient natural capital opportunities and offsetting and sequestration for all the farmers that we have in Devon, say? So, I mean, it's quite specialist at the moment. It's going to be quite competitive. Do you think that there is scope for everybody to go down the sort of natural capital public goods solution to their loss of or their reduction in income?
It's natural capital is such a broad and generally misunderstood term by a lot of people that the real politicians answer, David, I'm afraid, but I don't think there's a yes or no answer to that. But what I would say is that one of the problems that people are finding at the moment with trying to introduce the idea of natural capital and natural capital accounting is the idea of having a consistent approach from farm to farm. And is a certain type of farm in North Devon being assessed in the same way as one is in South Devon, for example. So there's first of all a real need to get consistency and clarity in how different farms are assessed. And the way that my own personal view for how this is going to develop is that, as you say, there's a lot of land in Devon. It's a very rural county, but there is a huge demand for natural capital and for biodiversity offsetting and so on. I think the challenge for farmers is going to be how they access that potential income stream at some point. And I think the way that that's going to happen, or have to happen, is that farmers will have to join together, so that instead of offering 200 acres here, 500 acres there, 200 here, there will have to be a broader approach where farmers come together in collaboration, and that way they hold a bit more clout.
Thank you. Angela, how does the bank view natural capital and income streams that flow from it?
Oh, off mute. Yes, we do. We actually do have a suite of products as well that are being that are launched to look at specifically what George is talking about there. And yes, very, very receptive from a lending perspective to look at the propositions. I think it's going to become more and more relevant and more important, as George has said. And we're going to see more and more opportunities.
So, but presumably, you've got to have a clearly identified income stream for you to be interested in lending against.
That is definitely correct. Yes, yeah. And that's where it's quite difficult at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean it's not quite there in my view yet, although there may be promise. What about Mark and Chris? Do you see the environment giving you income streams that will be interesting to your businesses?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much talk about at the moment, you know, carbon offsetting and all this sort of thing. That, you know, I think that there's nothing there. We're going to be in the new Elm scheme this year, and we've ticked a lot of extra boxes in there that we can farm alongside, which means that actually our sort of subsidy money will be very similar, if not actually a little bit more than what it's been in the past. So that's a great benefit. How long that continue, I don't know. But new sort of opportunities, we did look at this sort of carbon offsetting, but I just don't think it's quite there yet. I think there was an auction a while ago, and I think the results were disastrous. And really, in the world, are people going to accept that just because you've got a horrible factory making all this stuff, or an airline, or whatever it is, that but because you've got some trees somewhere else, then it's okay? Like, I think I can't see that holding for very long.
Chris?
Yeah, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. I think you said earlier there's a lot of hot air about natural capital, and until we've got a proposal, as Angela puts it, we need tangible offers or agents coming to us saying this is available and becoming more widely accepted. And then, but I think in the meantime, focus on your own business, like Andrew was saying earlier, focus on your core, focus on everything you do properly. And if this comes along later, all well and good, but until it does, I wouldn't wait for it.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask you a question about the public? So some of the diversifications that you talk about, you know, are public-facing enterprises. Does a farmer have to like the public to diversify? Anybody want to?
I think it makes it a whole lot easier, David. If you do like people, you need to be a personable person. You need to be able to enjoy might be a bit strong. You need to be able to cope with challenges and circumstance you wouldn't normally experience. One needs broad shoulders, and yeah, it won't be without its challenges, but nothing good ever was it?
So the guy who you know's had a really good time at Crealy and comes back with an invented complaint at the end to try and get their money back, you smile sweetly and shake his hand and give him the cash, do you?
Well, obviously everything would be on its own circumstance, but one tries to be fair in business and in life. And if it's a genuine complaint and we failed in some way, yes. If we don't think we have, and we think it's a try, and we try and placate and move forward. But life is short as well, and one doesn't want to be. Luckily, we have some great customers. That doesn't really happen too much.
So you're showing that actually you've also got to be a diplomat as well. Very good answer, Chris. I liked it. George would like to come in.
I suppose the point that your question, David, was driving at, or the thing that was flagging up, is that for a diversification to work, it has to suit the skill set of the person that's going to be introducing and running it.
Absolutely.
So clearly, the first part of any diversification, as Angela said, it's the same thing with the bank. The first thing they'll look at is the individual that's going to be running it. So if you're a grumpy old farmer that likes to spend time by himself, clearly glamping and doing high-end yurt holidays isn't the thing for you, with a meet and greet and a basket of cheese and wine and so on. So, the first thing is to look inwards and think, what do I enjoy? What am I passionate about? Because to make a diversification successful, it's going to take a huge amount of time alongside the existing business. And to be able to put up with those long nights and think hard work at the beginning, it needs to be something that someone is genuinely passionate about and willing to see through.
I think that's right. I think patience. So I remember we had some holiday people staying, and they came with the kettle and rang the doorbell very early and said the kettle's broken. What am I going to do about it? And it turned out they'd been putting an electric kettle on the gas, so it wasn't surprising the thing wasn't working. But you have to smile and carry on. And I'm sure you all had similar stories. It's not that easy. Angela, when you're looking at the person. And obviously, your impression when they come in to see you as to whether they would be good at the project that they want to talk to you about and asking you to fund, obviously being able to get on with people. If they can get on with you, they can probably get on with the public. There's a sort of similarity, but there's probably a wide boy or two that slip in to see you as well. How do you judge? You talk about judging the person. How do you get there?
I know, and it's an interesting question that you ask, and I think probably with any diversification or any business, you are going to have to deal with the public, and you are going to have to sell yourself, and that's not always that easy. So when we sit in front of a client or a prospective client and talk about a business, I think passion is very important as well, and how committed they are themselves. Is it just that they don't like doing what they're doing at the moment, so let's do something else? Or is it something they've really thought long and hard about, that they've done a lot of research into? They've looked at ways that it will definitely benefit them and benefit the farm. And I think if you've got that confidence, you really, really want to make it work, and that you will sell yourself to whoever you're sat opposite, whether it's the bank or whoever you're looking to impress with your business. And if it's your own baby or your own project, I think you will overcome a lot of not wanting the public. It's there, isn't it? You need to deal with it.
Yeah,
it's quite diverse, the different businesses that we've looked at, and some will have a lot of contact with people, and others will obviously not have as much. And I think most people will generally know their skills, really, as to whether they want to run a bed and breakfast where you are going to have pretty close contact with the general public, or a farm shop, or whether they just do a form of diversification within the farm, which doesn't put them so much in the general public domain.
Thank you. And Mark, I don't know whether you've got any thoughts on the public as part of the diversification?
I think a lot of it has been covered, but you've got to be willing to, speak to people, get on with them, help if they have a challenge, and it may not be coming from the angle you see it, but to them it might be an issue, and you've got to do the right thing, what's best long term. I think I agree with what George said. If being a people person and mixing with members of the public, shall we say, is not your thing, then look to renewables or something instead. Yeah, because it is every day, and the phone will ring at silly times, and you have to be charming. It's what it is. Yeah.
And you have to stick at social media even when you've had enough of it, don't you? I wondered whether you could say, this is really a question for all of you, really, how easy it is to research a new idea in the marketplace. So those of you that, when you started, whether it was Crealy, whether it was self-storage, you know, if you were going to go, I mean, do you remember there was that rush for llamas once upon a time, emu and things like that, and then a lot of it went up in a puff of smoke. How easy is it to research and break into a market? There seems to be, you know, a plethora of self-catering accommodation across the county. They're not all, perhaps in a year like this, it might be different when, you know, people want a holiday at home, but not all of them are going to succeed. How easy have you found it? And George, from your point of view, from your clients, how easy have you found it to research unusual things and to see whether there really is a market if you were to go into it?
I think that, you know, the internet and social media, the roles that they play in both of those have just opened up a huge volume of resources for everybody to look into. But I think also part of it, David, there's a lot of grant funding out there at the moment looking to support this type of thing. So there's a lot of avenues, and there's a lot of people looking to advise and to help with this sort of thing. So I think it's rare that you'll get something that's an entirely new idea. Of course, there are new takes on old ideas and different adaptions and so on. But I think the information's out there. If you want to look for it, it's easy to find, I think. I mean, I don't know, I suppose it's more one for Mark and Chris, in that they've both, you know, they're currently running very successful businesses and have started them from scratch.
And also, I think for Andrew as well, who will expect to see some research having been done for a new market for a project that somebody wants finance for. So, but let's go to Mark to start with, and then perhaps the other two can come in as well.
Yeah, I think the word passion has already been used quite a lot this evening, and I'm in complete agreement with it. I think, you know, this is to Devon young farmers at the moment. Everyone, by the seams of it, seems to be wanting to come to Devon or Cornwall or just escape the big cities. Devon's a huge tourist hotspot. You know, there are so many success stories locally. I think that if the person has an idea, an individual has an idea that they want to pursue, of course you've got to do your research, of course you've got to do cash flows, of course you've got to back it up. But if you're determined enough, you're focused enough, you've got a great idea and you want to push it, I'm the biggest believer in saying just go for it, because of all the people I know who are passionate, who've had a go at something they've been a bit about, they've pretty much all succeeded. I can't actually think of any of my friends who started up something they're really keen about that's gone the wrong way. So yeah, I think it's the person, you've got to want to do it and just go for it.
Okay, Angela. No, you're not. Yeah.
I'm having a wobble with the internet as well, I think. But people who generally come to see us have done a huge amount of research. If they are genuinely looking for us to support them as well. It is amazing how much, and we can help them as well with that, to look and to hopefully to put them in contact with people as well who can give them more information. But it is always very impressive, especially with the young people, how much research they do. And obviously social media and technology helps immensely these days, doesn't it, to do that. But no, it is always very impressive.
And Chris, what about the research?
Thank you, David. What I cannot stress enough is to get out of your office, out of your own farm, and go and speak to people that are already doing it successfully. 8 years ago, we diversified further from Crealy, from a day visitor attraction into accommodation. And before we did that, we went around and talked to lots of people that had campsites and lodges and glamping. And people are remarkably open and welcoming and encouraging when you ask. People like showing you around their facilities. They're proud of what they do, which they rightly should be. And I cannot stress enough, go and talk to people. It's for free often, nearly always for free, unless you're speaking to an agent, George. But that is the biggest thing I can recommend, is get out and speak to people and look around, and don't just rely on the internet and your gut feel.
Thank you. One other form of diversification, I suppose, is to move up the food chain a bit. And I wondered whether any of you would like to say anything about diversification as a way of securing a greater proportion of the value of the products that you might be making, and what opportunities you think there might be, and whether, particularly, whether you think COVID has changed any attitudes to that, or might do, as to what happens in the future. So really, just thoughts about food chain matters and price and product and sourcing and local and all that, really. Any thoughts from any of you? Yes, Angela.
I think it's generally created a much greater awareness amongst people, particularly of where their food comes from, and the journey it makes to get to them. And I think that is a very, very positive thing. I think generally the whole of the COVID situation has, in some respects, has helped some of our farmers. I think it's been good for them. There's certainly, where I live, there's been a huge focus on shopping locally, buying food from farmers markets, local stores. So, and I know that we've actually seen quite a lot of increase in demand for the basic products such as eggs and meat and flour and milk and the dairy products. So I don't know if anybody else feels the same, David,
Okay.
but
Any
I
other
certainly
thoughts?
feel there has.
Yes, Mark?
Yeah, I think that there is a huge amount of additional awareness around local food, and people really do want to try and buy local, but because of our consumer habits with going to supermarkets and things, it's not actually that easy to do. We've sort of discussed it numerous times, but every time I'm very worried on a sort of small scale, us trying to either use ice cream or do a milk round, or whether it's selling our meat privately. I think if I was going to do that, I would need to have somebody else to work alongside. Now, whether that be have someone, have a new employee who takes on that side, or do into a joint venture with someone else with more knowledge, expertise, to make sure that I didn't take too much time away from everything else we're doing. So I think there's huge opportunities there, but it's just making sure that you don't end up being a busy fool and doing a milk round, selling it a bit more than you do to your main buyer, but you're so tired because you've been up at 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock or 3 o'clock or whatever time it is every morning, that you then lose track of what you're actually doing. I think if we were going to do something like that, we definitely need to have someone else on board.
Okay.
I think it is the panacea, really, isn't it, to move up the food chain, get more of the retail percentage, and have that direct link with customers. One needs to balance the risk and effort and physical determination to make that happen, and the rewards likely from it, compared to what you could gain from having that same determination improve the business you're in, or even expanding the business you're in. So I think it's oft talked about, but there are several companies you can hold up as shining examples of doing such, but it's not for everyone by any chance, and it is not without risk.
No. George?
I'd just like to echo what everybody else has said, really, about this sort of wartime spirit that seems to have come out of lockdown. There's been a real appreciation for human relationships, local produce, and I think that's is a wave that we need to ride somehow, and really make sure we make the most of it, as part of the agricultural economy. But like Mark said, it's not for everybody, and Chris has said it too. It's not for everybody. It does require a huge amount of work. But I suppose another thing I'd add to it is whether or not you look to diversify away from your core. So rather than, let's say, Mark doing beef boxes with the beef cattle he finishes, is there a bit of ground where you can put some extra fencing up, utilise grant funding for it, and go for venison instead? If you find someone locally that's particularly, you just don't know. And I suppose my only thought on it, don't discount anything without really looking into it, I suppose, because it doesn't have to be what you're currently doing, albeit clearly that's something where you've already got the knowledge and can build on your business, then that makes a lot of sense. But there's also a lot of transferable skills that farmers and farm workers will inevitably have that could suit other produce as well.
Okay, so one of the diversifications which I've noticed is almost second nature to farmers is property, one way and another. And if you start with the land, then that's a first step in that direction, or with barns, or class Q opportunities, or whatever it might be. What do you think of the way the planning system currently works, and how do you think it might go from here on, listening to politicians speaking? Yes, Mark.
In one of the surveys done by Farmers Weekly last year, what was really interesting was that on barriers to entry on diversification, I think after funding, planning permission and sort of fear of not getting in front was the second biggest sort of barrier to people. And I think, planning is something that people get really worked up about, because you might put an application in and the local goody two-shoes puts up a comment saying how horrible you are. But actually, the planning system does support rural diversification. And I think at the moment is probably as good as it's ever been, as long as it doesn't change anytime soon. So yeah, I think if you're afraid of it, don't be afraid. Get someone on board to help out and go for it.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else want to say anything on planning?
Gosh.
So Chris first, and then George.
Chris, yeah.
I was going to say, gosh, have we got another couple hours to talk about planning? Yes. In our experience, the council has been very supportive over the years. That's not to say it hasn't been challenging at times, but in general, there are some good people in the council and officers, and the policies are there, like Mark said, to support people. They want businesses to succeed. They want us to employ people for the community. So I think there is a fear sometimes that it's too hard, but again, to be successful in business, I think a lot of it is to do with determination and perseverance. And if you've got that, you need that with planning, and you need to keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody else on planning? No. We have a question coming on the chat to Mark and Chris, whether they are planning to diversify more or do more of the same. In other words, direction of travel for your business, really. So that general question from James.
Mark?
Yes, yeah. I think we found our avenue, and we're going to, our focus is very much on the farmers we're doing. We'll continue to push the farm, and we have managed to secure planning to extend the storage, and so we're pushing that at the moment as well. I think there are two sort of channels, and they're working well for us, so we're going to keep pursuing.
From my point of view, I think one of the benefits of diversification is that you tend to look at more opportunities and be more open to opportunities, and perhaps more nimble on your feet. So I'm a great believer in the more you do, the more you can do, and the more you learn, the more you can do. So we want to continue to improve our business, and I'm sure there'll be other things coming down the line.
So a question really about the future, and while somebody's asking that, can you also just think individually what your most unusual farm diversification project that you've ever come across or heard about, just so that we can just maybe round up with those. But I think I don't know how you feel. We've got a Brexit coming. We've got a change from the current support system. What's your thoughts about what is ahead of the farming sector? Are you optimistic about how people are going to cope, and do you have fears for some people currently in agriculture? I mean, for the fact that you're on this panel suggests that you are go ahead and interested in things, and that's fine. But I guess there are some people that are wondering which way to turn at the moment a bit, and I just wondered what your thoughts were on the future of Devon agriculture across the board, really, not just your own sector or your own area or your own geography, but for the industry and the county as a whole.
I think climate change and sustainability are the two biggest words out, or two biggest phrases out there at the moment. That is going to affect us all very quickly, especially with the targets of being carbon net zero by 2050 or massive reduction by 2030. I think farmers actually hold all the answers because of the land mass, because of the opportunities to reduce carbon footprint. But some of what we do has got a large carbon footprint. Intensive agriculture, even some forms of extensive agriculture do, and you've got to be willing to adapt and accept that climate change is going to affect us. That's from my end.
Thank you. Anyone else? George and then Angela?
My answer's a mixed one, to be honest. Feeling pretty positive for those go-ahead farmers that are already taking advantage of all the opportunities that are available for them at the moment, whether it's claiming their subsidy, environmental subsidy, diversifying their existing holding. But I am genuinely concerned for the lower end of the spectrum, if you like, with the more traditional farmers that perhaps aren't so receptive to change and are less willing to adapt. Something that we come across quite a lot of the time that's incredibly frustrating is lots of dare I say, tenant farmers that refuse to deal with the perceived red tape of various environmental stewardship schemes. And it's the direction of travel for all farm subsidy payments, and it's simply something that all farmers, I think, have to get on board with. And there will be ways that it'll work. It'll work different on different farms, but I'm sure there is funding to be made available for all different types of farms. And for those that are canny enough to sniff out the right options that suit their farm, there's money there. So my view really on how things are going to look is how receptive various different types of farms are going to be to change, whether or not they're willing to make the most of the opportunities presented to them, or whether it'll be that sort of shrug of the shoulders and say, well, we've always got by, we'll continue to get by, because I think, sadly, those days might be limited.
Thank you. Angela?
Very similar, actually, to what George has just said. And I wish we knew more about elms. I wish we understood more, because the removal of basic payment to some traditional farms, upland farms particularly, is going to be massive. And so, yeah, to understand the elms would make a huge difference to them and help them to plan going forward.
And not leave a gap.
And not leave a gap.
Between
and that uncertainty, that element of uncertainty.
And I think, you know, you're used to, as a bank, to providing the money on the deal that you've done with the client when they want it in the way that you've agreed. I think for those who have historically waited for RPA checks and waited, that lack of certainty has led to a loss of confidence in some of those. In
the system.
Chris, anything on this?
Yeah. Well, one thing I would say is farmers are a hugely resilient bunch, and if they earn less, they normally spend less and they can survive. So that's the first thing. the other big thing is Brexit and tariffs, isn't it? What tariff regime are we going to be faced? I mean, that could be massive, as is exchange rate, which has already been helping us since the Brexit vote hugely. I mean, without coming out on after that vote, the pound would have been hugely stronger, and I don't think people quite realise how bad it would have affected agri income. But I suppose the biggest concern really is the dichotomy in the difference between tenants and landowners. Landowners have lots of opportunities, even, you know, the inland farms that, you know, may not have such obvious income streams to perhaps PV or letting a barn near a conurbation for industrial. But I think if you've got a good landlord that can help and work with you to share incomes, if there are opportunities, and if there's open dialogue between landlord and tenant, so that you can have that discussion without being scared to have that discussion, George, I think we're in a lot better place. But if there is this fear and a restriction on what they're allowed to do without perhaps losing the farm, etc., that is going to be a concern for tenant farmers moving forward.
Thank you. I think given the time, there's just time for you to give me one unusual diversification that you've come across, if you've thought of one. George, have you got one?
It's not so much a diversification, more a change of usual agricultural practice. It's a tenant farmer that's used various waste from the fishing industry, as well as yogurt, human waste, and also Evian bottles that have gone out of date, being applied to the land as fertilizer and improving the soil. So not so much diversification, but lots going on.
Okay, thank you. Angela?
This wasn't actually me, but it was a colleague. They became undertakers and adapted some of the farm buildings accordingly. It's quite unusual, isn't it?
It is quite unusual, and then yes, and woodlands as well for the same purpose. Burial
grounds, yes, of course. Yeah.
Mark?
Well, that's ridiculous. On the same note as Angela, one of my friends was getting very excited about potentially starting a pet crematorium, as he thought it was very lucrative, but that's pretty intense, I think.
Thank you. Chris, have you got one?
Strangely, that was exactly what I was going to say, the pet cemetery, yeah. But yeah, there's lots of varied things, I'm sure.
Yeah, okay. Well, listen, a couple of questions have just come in, and I'm really sorry. It's a little bit too late because I'm under strict instructions on time. And what I want to do is bring Helen in. But can I just thank you all? It's been great, and really enjoyed your contributions. And also, Helen, I'd like to thank you. I know you've been there in the background, and Dan as well. So, Helen, over to you.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to wrap this evening up with a few thank yous. First of all, thank you to all of our panellists, Angela, Mark, George, and Chris, for all your really valuable comments. I'm sure everyone's had a few take-home messages they can take from tonight's debate. I would also like to thank David again for chairing this evening's meeting and so effortlessly keeping all of our panellists under control. But most of all, I would also like to thank NFU Mutual. They are supporting all of our debates. This is the third debate that we've run. We've got 4 in total. So thank you for their support, not only for these debates, but the continued support that they give to Devon young farmers. And finally, I would just like to thank everyone for tuning in and being part of tonight's debate. I'm sure you've all enjoyed it as much as I have. Well, all I have left to say is our 4th and final debate is scheduled for the 24th of September, and we've got another 4 fantastic panellists lined up for that one, which is titled Looking Out for Each Other. It's time to talk about mental health and rural isolation. So I hope to see you all at our next debate, and thank you once again.